Alright, so I guess this is my next endeavor. The Napoleonic Wars, a GMT game. I have mixed feelings about it. This is just a first impression at this point. One of the first things is I've made it through the rulebook, and the campaign manual for that matter. And I feel like the rules are very poorly organized. I walk away from them so far without a really good feel for what the game is. There are a number of places where I have some serious questions where I'm pretty sure that there are ambiguities that are going to be hard to resolve. I also know, on top of that, there's a fairly hefty glossary, which is a little different from terms that I'm used to in wargaming. I've gotten used to things like keys, which are related to the CDGs, but there are others which, are sensible terms like formations, armies, army groups, all very clearly defined, but you have to keep paging back to find them. A lot of the organization of the book, for what there is, seems like somebody threw together the rules as they were kind of thinking of them. There's not a lot of good cross-indexing. There's not a lot of good... there are notes, hey, see this rule about this or whatever. It's just, it doesn't feel as comfortable as I'd hoped. Another thought about it. I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things, and I haven't looked too carefully at the deck because I like that to be a surprise. But I've heard a lot of people say a lot of things about how this is not a good historical treatment. It's not very realistic, whatever. I'm walking away from it at this point with the initial impression of, well, why are they being so harsh on this and maybe Sword of Rome, which I've also heard this about. But they're not harsh on it on Here I Stand in the same way. And my feeling there is perhaps it's a matter of a lot of people are much more familiar with the Napoleonic period, much more familiar with the Roman period, and much, much less happy about things happening out of sequence. Another issue here is this deck, one single deck, unscripted, all shuffled together. Events can happen whenever you like. That's at least my guess. There are some that are limited, can't happen on the first turn, whatever. I think that makes a lot of people unhappy, even though I'm not sure that I can think of many events, except maybe the American War, that were that unlikely to happen at any time. I can't think of any strong reason why you'd need the kind of timed sequencing and scripting that you have over on Here I Stand, and I'm not sure how much of it. Some of it in Here I Stand is necessary, like leader lives and deaths and stuff like that. You really do need, and some of it for balance in terms of, hey, which pope is going to be here? Well, let's make sure we have a decent one at least for part of the game. All right, so those should not be big issues in this. Big issues in this are which way the alliances fall. And if you're playing where everybody's their own player, I think actually, if you look at the most sort of acclaimed of the detailed historical treatments of the whole campaign, 1805 to 1815, which is what the period of this game covers, what comes to mind is the sort of the gold standard, the epitome of these, Empires in Arms. Now, there is no game that allows for more unrealistic diplomatic maneuvering than Empires in Arms. This game, and I believe the same designer's previous game, War and Peace, both assume very fixed pro-French and anti-French coalitions, which I would say 90% is almost entirely correct. There were a couple of countries which I think had more opportunistic positions. Of all the more or less major countries, the only one I can really think of is Turkey. You might convince yourself something like Sweden, although they pretty much denigrated eventually into a purely anti-French position. Or not even sure if I can think of anything else that had a strongly opportunistic position. And you see these very, very often in Empires in Arms. Empires in Arms, one of the times I played, Austria and Prussia cut a deal where Silesia was handed off. Another time I was playing Russia, the French player approaches me and basically says, let's split Europe, which isn't an unreasonable statement, actually, but there's a lot more flexibility in those games where you can play sort of in that particular game, where you can play sort of a balance of things, and very, very odd circumstances can arise. Powers becoming major powers which weren't before. I've seen Austria become a great power in Empires in Arms. I've seen Turkey become a great power with swaths of Russia under its control, considered home nation territories. These are events that are of questionable historicity at the very best. I can't imagine that this game is going to depart any further than some of the things I've seen in Empires in Arms. War and Peace tends to be pretty structured. It's got the same situation of a balance where you're facing one side, or you're either pro-French or anti-French. It's got pretty much the same powers with the addition of Spain. We've got powers in this game, the real player powers: Britain, France, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, and that's it. That's one less than I'm used to. I'm used to Spain being a power, and I'm used to Turkey being a potential power in Empires in Arms. So anyway, I have high hopes that this is going to be a multiplayer game at about the same level as Age of Napoleon. I don't think it's going to feel terribly ahistorical, just very abstracted. When I see the troops, these little circles with numbers on them, when I see the combat system, which is buckets of dice, 5s and 6s are hits of various types, I'm seeing the same kind of similar, very simple systems that I'm used to from Here I Stand. I may have some issues with some of them, but overall I think they work for the game as long as there's enough else to the game, as long as the cards provide enough. So I guess this is the big thing with CDGs. They can be much, much simpler than a straight war game of the same nature. I remember games like, I think it's called 30 Years War by, I don't know, it came out in an S&T. And I was totally unimpressed with it because it had essentially this kind of mechanism, but without the addition of the cards. I think the cards make a very, very simple game somewhat more playable and more fun. Anyway, I'm hoping that this is kind of an enjoyable one. I hear it can be played in 3-4 hours maybe. Obviously, I'm going to take longer because I'm playing it for the first time, and playing solitaire, I always kind of savor a game a little more than I would otherwise. I'm going to load this up because it is just a first impression, and it'll give you guys an idea of where I'm going. But I still have to read the rules again and get kind of a feel for what I'm going to be doing.